Welcome to the first video in this series and on this YouTube channel. If you followed me on TikTok, you've known this is coming for a while now. So thank you to all of you who came over from TikTok, and for those who found me on YouTube. It means a lot to me, and I can't wait to bring you guys this series of my top 10 teams going into the college football season. I got the inspiration for this video format from Marcus from That Franchise Guy, so huge shout out to him. This is in no way meant to be a copy of that series, but it is kind of the college football version of the deep dive videos. We're gonna be looking at everything about these college football teams in the top 10, why I'm ranking them there. We're gonna be breaking down their scheme. We're gonna look at their transfer portal additions, the departures. We'll look at their coaching changes. We'll grade the roster overall, and then finally we'll go ahead and do an actual season prediction at the end of the video. These will all have time codes, so if you're only interested in one specific aspect of it, feel free to click there. You won't hurt my feelings. I would love to be able to do more than 10 teams, but let's be honest, we can't do all 134 FBS teams at this point, and 10 felt like the right number for the amount of time we have going into the summer. For this account though, a quick note, once the season starts, I will be doing recap videos on Sundays and predictions going into the week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're interested in that and you want to see these deep dive videos continue for the top 10 teams going into the season. For this series, the first thing that we'll start off with always is the offseason changes, so that includes coaching changes and player personnel changes. We'll talk about scheme a little bit if it changed, but we'll really break that down in the third segment. The next segment after this will be rating the actual players on the roster and grading the rooms overall as a whole. I'll give number grades out to players that I've evaluated as part of my returning player review series, which you can find over on my Patreon. If you are a Patreon member, you'll have access to all my player rankings. You'll get exclusive videos. There's a lot to check out over there, so make sure you click on the link in my bio to find out more about that. Like I said, after that, we'll get into the scheme, and this will be the part of the video that I know a lot of people probably clicked on it to see. We'll be breaking down what defense they're gonna run, what offense they primarily run. If there's a new staff, how is it gonna change from the previous year? And then finally, we'll end with an actual prediction where I'll go through and pick every single game. This won't take too long. It's kind of high level analysis, but it'll at least be an insight into how I think they're gonna perform going into 2026. I've spent plenty of time on the intro. You guys get the hang of it. Let's go straight into my number 10 team, the Ole Miss Rebels. I struggled really heavily between 9 and 10, and there's a ton of teams in the top 15 that all could have made the argument for this. I'm not gonna reveal who those teams are right now, but I will do an honorable mention segment when I pick my number 1 team. Honestly, all of these teams have so many strengths and weaknesses, but for Ole Miss, it just came down to 2 specific things, and that is Kewan, Lacy, and Trinidad, Chambliss. Those 2 players really carry this team to another level than some of the others on the list, and we'll spend plenty of time talking about them. There's a lot of uncertainty around Ole Miss with all of the changes on that staff and personnel, but I think they retained most of the players that they needed to in order to have a successful season. To start off, we'll go over the coaching changes for Ole Miss because there are plenty. I'll throw up a graphic on the screen here that summarizes them. I'm not gonna read all of them out, but I'll talk about the main important ones. Obviously, we're gonna talk about Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss at the end of the season for LSU. This was a wild move in college football. I mean, I get all of the hate towards Kiffin. He left his team in the middle of a playoff run, and we can debate that for the next decade, what could have been if Lane had stayed with this Ole Miss team. I don't think they end up beating Indiana, but they did come very close to beating Miami after beating Georgia. Who knows if that happens with Kiffin in the room or not, but I guess we'll never know. I don't want to take too much time to talk about Kiffin since he's not the coach anymore, but this is a huge loss. I don't think you can sugarcoat that, and it's mainly a loss because of all the staff that followed him, primarily offensive coordinator Charlie Weis Jr., who had a huge role in this offense, and I think that those 2 minds together really allowed this team to roll on all cylinders. This isn't always a loss. There were plenty of WTF moments from Kiffin, like we see here against Kentucky, that ultimately gets Austin Simmons hurt and paves the way for Trinidad Chambliss to come in. I remember some other wild play against Oklahoma, I believe, in the red zone with Austin Simmons too. It's just, there are so many head scratchers. There's also the near guaranteed collapses with Kiffin teams, like against Kentucky and Florida in 2024. It wasn't always pretty. But overall, yeah, you're gonna be missing Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis Jr. for what they did. They were able to bring in John David Baker from East Carolina. He was the offensive coordinator at East Carolina last season and helped them to have one of the best offenses in the FBS. Ole Miss also retained quarterbacks coach Joe Judge, which, oh, to see how he's fallen after having a head coaching tenure with the New York Giants. John David Baker is going to continue to bring tempo to this offense though, and we'll get to that in the scheme section, but be prepared to score fast and go 3 and out fast. It's amazing to see when it works, but it's infuriating to watch when it doesn't. They chased a lot of explosives at ECU and it worked. I mean, they ranked top 20 in passing plays over 15 yards. If anything, they might be chasing more explosives this year than they did last year. For the most part, this will be the same type of plays that Ole Miss ran. getting the quarterback moving out of the pocket. They place an emphasis on getting the ball to playmakers. That will still be there. Just creating opportunities for Deuce Alexander to show off what he can do, maybe throw Kewan Lacy out there. They're going to keep stretching the field, probably more so. I'll talk about this later, but I didn't love how they called these one-read, one-on-one sideline shots, but I'd be prepared to still see them. And then, of course, they will still be RPO heavy. That's a lot of college offenses, but in this quick tempo, get the ball out and go system, it's very simple reads and quick decision-making that the quarterback will have to have. For the defense, not a lot is changing because Pete Golding is still calling the plays. They tried to hire Patrick Toney in January, and then he immediately left for the Atlanta Falcons, so they ended up not hiring him as defensive coordinator. Pete Golding will still be overseeing almost all of that, even though he is the head coach. They did internally promote Brian Brown, but once again, this is mainly going to be Golding. Golding was the defense coordinator at UTSA in 2016 and 2017 before joining Nick Saban's Alabama teams for a run from 2018 to 2023. And there were some interesting times over there. It's kind of an odd marriage because we know who really ran the show when it comes to the Bama defense, but Golding takes a lot of the blame for some of the meltdowns that Alabama had. They just had some bad moments like 2019 LSU, 2019 Auburn, 2021 Texas A&M, 2022 Tennessee, and LSU. The Bama defense routinely would break down in key moments under Golding, which led Bama fans to being very happy when he departed for Ole Miss. But I think it's safe to say that he's turned his career around a little bit coaching at Ole Miss. They had a great defense in 2024, one of the best in the sport, especially against the run. They were great against the run this year as well, not as much against the pass, but a lot of that comes down to personnel. Kiffin placed a high emphasis on getting explosive offensive players to the transfer portal, and sometimes it felt like the defense was a little neglected talent-wise, especially this past year. So I would say Golding did a pretty good job with what he was given. An area I do think that they downgraded in, though, is running back coach. They brought in Frank Wilson from LSU, which is kind of funny. Frank Wilson's a good recruiter. He's landed a lot of good prospects, but LSU's running game has been pretty bad the past few years, and it's a mix of a lot of things. It's not exactly a hire that gets you excited based on his track record. He can recruit, but I don't necessarily know if he can develop based on the backs that they've had. I think Lacy is talented enough to where this doesn't really matter, but for some of the younger, highly touted guys that they have, this could have a long-term effect on that room. Speaking of that, let's move on from coaching to the roster because there are a lot of changes here. Not as many departures as you might have expected, though, when Kiffin first took the LSU job. On offense, they added 2 running backs in Mekhi Frazier and Joshua Dye. Frazier was the 8th rated running back in the portal according to 24/7 Sports. He is a pile driver type of a back. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's also not starting. We know that. I'm glad Ole Miss made the effort to bring in another competent back. Kewan Lacy got 300 touches last season. They ran him into the ground and he ended up getting hurt I believe, before the Tulane game or during the Tulane game. And then I know for sure he got hurt in the Miami game. So he was kind of running on treads at the end of the season and was still playing at an elite level. They also added Joshua Dye from Utah State, and I'm not really sure what the recruiting pitch was here. He led the FCS in rushing yards, but there were probably teams out there where he could have a starting role and not be the 3rd or 4th string running back. Maybe he just wants to play SEC ball, I don't know. If Lacy, God forbid, gets hurt though, they're not screwed. They have some depth in that room now. Probably their biggest addition was Darrell Gill Jr., the wide receiver from Syracuse, and we'll get to his teammate later, but he is a big body, strong downfield threat. This is the Dijon Stribling replacement, straight up, and they needed that. Darrell Gill suffered from a horrendous quarterback play last year, so all the stuff you'll want to watch from him has to come from games with Steve Angeli. This will be the toughest competition he's faced, though. If you watch him against Tennessee last season, he did look up to par. There's just some bad throws in there, unfavorable game. Don't judge the 2 catches for 33 yards too harshly. On the surface, he kind of reminds me of Adonai Mitchell in a way, but we'll see what his potential really is. Then we get to his teammate, Jonte Cook. Jonte had quite the saga when he was at Texas. I remember watching him when Arch Manning was playing, subbing in for Quinn Ewers after he got injured, and thinking that Jonte Cook had a high future at Texas. He was a very talented recruit, but he ended up proving to be a bit of a head case. He got kicked off the team while he was here. We don't fully know why. There are rumors out there, but I'm not going to talk about them in this video. What I will talk about is that he went to Washington for about 1 day before also getting kicked off of that team. And then he went to Syracuse, where he made some incredible catches, and he had some really good games for Syracuse. Over 100 yards against Clemson, that comes to mind. I do think that there's still potential for Jonte Cook, and I'll talk about his rating later. I still have him rated as a decent receiver. Like, I still think he's a good prospect. He runs good routes. I think there is hope for him to have a decent role in this Ole Miss offense, given the hole that's left from Caden Lee departing. Then they brought in Carius Kern, and the amount of back and forth between LSU and Ole Miss is objectively funny, and Kern is one of the more high-profile LSU guys to leave the team and join Ole Miss. The problem is, as an offensive tackle, he's not that good. Like, remember when people were gassing up Cassius Howell as a first-round pick? This is the reason why. He probably should just be playing guard, but Ole Miss retained all 3 starters on the inside, so he's going to have to play tackle yet again. And correct me if I'm wrong, LSU fans, but there's a lot of work to do here. I'm not banking on him being a star by any means. Then on the defensive side, it's headlined by Luke Farelli, of course, who is at the center of a lot of controversy, with Dabo Swinney accusing Pete Golding of stealing him from Clemson and tampering and all the other fun stuff going on in college football nowadays. Look, man, everyone's doing it. I hate to break it to you. It's just the world we live in. Farelli is not a player that I've watched enough of at this point. I didn't get through much of the Cal defense, if I'm being honest with you, but I caught up for this video, and he is a see-ball, get-ball linebacker. Super fast, super twitched up. He trusts his eyes. He's going to fly around and make a lot of plays for this defense, but he will take the wrong running lanes from time to time, and you might be yelling at your TV because of it. It's a similar story with Keaton Thomas. He's someone who's very productive at Baylor. Over 219 tackles in 2 seasons there, with 3.5 sacks, 14 TFLs, 2 interceptions. He's another one of these see-ball, get-ball type of players. He's a great tackler, hence his production, but be prepared, Ole Miss fans. You might pull your hair out at the amount of bad lanes that he takes. There's a lot of missed assignments on his tape, and that's just why I didn't really consider him like a huge impact transfer, but he has proven that he can produce. I just don't know if we'll be talking about him as one of the best linebackers in the SEC at the end of the year, and it's a bit problematic that he and Farelli both have similar issues. To go along with him in the spine of the defense is Jonel Aguero, the safety transferring in from Georgia, who honestly I thought was pretty good at Georgia. Like, he's a great run defender. He's usually in the right place at the right time. I get the sentiment that he was going to lose his job to Rashawn Dinkins, but it's an interesting move. He's not elite in coverage by any means. Georgia fans will tell you that loud and clear, but it's still a huge upgrade to what Ole Miss had last year. I mean, that secondary was pretty bad. When we watch the scheme videos later, you'll kind of see what I mean. Another safety that they added who I liked was Edwin Joseph. Now, he had some maturity issues at Florida State, a bit hot-headed, apparently would get into it with coaches, but he's a young player and you'd hope that he can continue to grow, and that is something to flag. Like Aguero, he's a solid tackler, but I don't know if he's someone who's a game changer in coverage, and that begs the question, who is going to be a game changer in coverage for this team? Because on the back end, you have 2 safeties transferring in that are great run defenders and great at making plays on the ball, but aren't necessarily going to always have their man covered and be in the right place. Now, this is much less of a problem in the corner room with the addition of Jay Crawford, who I did a video on back in February. I thought he was a great player. He is a CB1 NFL caliber football player, very fluid mover. He can flip his hips on a dime. His eyes are always working with the quarterback. He doesn't bite on eye candy. He is a bit handsy because he's slightly undersized, so we'll need to refine his technique for playing man-to-man coverage, but he's a great player to have in the system that takes a lot of mental strength from the corner position. Once again, we'll get to that later, but you need to know a lot of rules to play corner in this kind of cover 7 Nick Saban style defense, and I trust Crawford to do that. For the defensive line, they added 6'5", 350-pound Mekhi Burrow, I'm really hoping I pronounced that right, from Florida, who is basically the Xavier Harris replacement, a big nose tackle to place next to Will Eccles, who is one of the best defensive tackles in the SEC. They also brought in Blake Purchase from Oregon, who has huge upside. He's a former top 150 recruit, sets the edge really well against the run. The reason he was limited at Oregon is just because they have 2 dudes on the edge who probably would start at just about every Power 4 program. So despite being a rotational player, I do think he could really work his way into the lineup here. He's also a great tackler. I don't think he missed any tackles in 300 plus snaps, which is great. I don't know if he'll be a star, but I do expect him to be a well-known name with his fan base by the end of the year. So yeah, this defense is, on paper, much better than last year, and I can say that pretty confidently even before we get into the rosters, because 7 out of the 11 starters on this defense, presumed starters that is, are transfer portal players. So that leaves a big question mark of how is this team going to gel, because we see this all the time happen where these mercenary teams come in, they bring in a ton of new guys who have no clue how to play together, and it crashes and burns. So obviously, I have a little bit of faith. I have Ole Miss in my top 10 teams. I think it's going to work out, but it is something to raise the question of, is like, are you over-relying on bringing in this talent? When it comes to players that they lost, there's actually not as much to write about here as you probably would have expected. They lost quarterback Austin Simmons to the portal, but he was going to be a backup to Trinidad Chambliss. He's still very talented though. I did a video on him as well over on TikTok that you can check out. He went to Mizzou and will be the starter there, and it'll be interesting to watch when he comes into town. They lost Prince William Mielen off the edge, and that's probably the biggest loss on the defensive side. You could argue that TJ Daugherty at linebacker, but I think they made up for the loss of Daugherty with bringing in Farrelly much better than they made up for the loss of Prince William Mielen. We'll get to that though. Then they lost wide receiver Caden Lee, also to Missouri, and he is a very underrated piece of this Ole Miss team. I do think out of the slot, that is a pretty big loss, especially given the fact that he probably does have some continuity with Trinidad Chambliss. You would have hoped to have him stay, but oh well, you went out and you got Jonte Cook, and you really hope that he'll be able to take that role. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's go position by position and talk about this Ole Miss team and really figure out how good they're gonna be based on what they have on the roster now. We're gonna start off at quarterback. This one is pretty easy to talk about because it's breakout star Trinidad Chambliss. When I first watched Chambliss last year on TV, I wasn't that impressed. Like, I liked him as a runner. I thought he delivered the ball well in structure, but there were some pretty bad misses on TV, and I thought he kind of broke down at the end of the Georgia game. But man, oh man, was I wrong and was I corrected as the year went on, because he just kept getting better. He really did blossom into being one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, and I thought he should have declared for the draft. I will say though, part of it was he had a very easy offense, and that kind of stuff will still be there for him this year with plenty of RPO and getting the ball out to playmakers, but he can do so much more than that. He can get on the move and deliver the football accurately. He has a lot of arm strength packed in his small frame. He can rip it into tight windows. His ability as a designed runner is one of one. He is so twitchy and so strong, and he's a huge threat with his legs. Not in the way of like, oh, he'll get you on third and long scrambling, but he will turn into a running back basically on a design run. He'll create and extend plays and use his legs in every way possible to give his team the advantage. He took over the game in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, it was like watching a magician back there. He also has a lot of confidence in his arm to attack over the middle, so if given the chance, he will take it. There's a lot to like about him as a player, and him and the next player are the reason that I put Ole Miss in the top 10. So naturally, I'm going to give this room an S tier grade. Trinidad Chambliss, I have graded as a 79.25 overall. And for perspective, basically anything over an 80 is what I consider a first round talent. So he is right there, man. It's a good time to talk about how I grade. I'm only grading draft eligible players based on the rubric that I have. I'll show it up on the screen here. If I haven't watched enough tape to confidently give them a grade, then I'm not giving them one. I don't want to come on here and fake anything. These are the different archetypes that I grade by. Feel free to pause the video, take a picture. You can also access this on Patreon. These are the grading criteria for each position, like what I'm looking for when I watch tape, and I rate that a number out of 10, and that gives their total score based on their archetype. Then we get to his teammate, running back Kewan Lacy, and boy, oh boy, we have ourselves a dude. I mean, I have a first round grade on him as of now. Lacy has elite contact balance and pad level. He will be the lowest man at the line of scrimmage, and it gives him the ability to just pin ball off of tacklers. He's not a huge running back, only 5'11", 200 pounds, but he's very strong and he knows how to use that strength. Almost all of his long runs involve him breaking some sort of tackle. There are plenty of highlights that I can sit here and show you, but obviously the stats are gonna back that up. You don't need to have this video to tell you that Kewan Lacy is a dude, but he is an elite pass blocker, and I have to highlight that. We watched some incredible stuff from him last year with his effort and attitude towards blocking. There are moments where I thought that he danced a little too much, and I think he needs to get a little more confident and just bang, there's a running lane, hit the hole. This is why I say the offensive line is a tad overrated, and we'll talk about that in a second, but he wants to be a patient back, but the holes oftentimes didn't open up before he had the chance to. There aren't many critiques, but every player can improve, and that's just one of the areas I found myself saying he could get better. But yeah, Kewan Lacy, fantastic player. He will be fun to watch. This room gets an S tier grade because of what he is able to do, and the depth behind him is also really good. At receiver, they lost Caden Lee to Missouri, they lost Winston Watkins to LSU, and then they lost Dribbling and Harrison Wallace to the NFL. Daquan Wright went to the NFL too. Ole Miss is gonna have a lot of work to do because that group of guys was so good for them. There are moments on Chambliss's tape where he just kind of tosses it up to one of those guys and they would make a play for him, and it made him look really good. Luckily, they kept a great football player in Deuce Alexander, who I thought had some really impressive moments in 2025. He was kind of the number 3 option, number 4 option behind Wallace, Stribling, and Lee. And it makes sense. I mean, we can talk about Stribling's draft position getting taken 33 overall, but that's where he went. He was a second-round pick. Alexander didn't crack 100 yards last year. His season high in catches was 4. Like, you can look at that and think he's not anything special, but when you go watch him, there's a lot potentially there. He can track the ball well downfield. There are some great plays on tape. I thought he looked great against Georgia. He got the #1 jersey this offseason, which is a huge deal at Ole Miss for wide receivers. I do think that he's put in a lot of work and is a potential breakout candidate for this Ole Miss team, and is someone that we should probably have our eyes on as potentially being a 1,000-yard receiver next year. I talked about the two main transfer guys earlier, but behind them are two other transfers in Horatio Fields and Cameron Miller. Cameron Miller is most likely just following his receivers coach over from Kentucky, who left Kentucky to join the Ole Miss staff. He was a freshman last year. He had 13 catches for 141 yards, so nothing groundbreaking, but there is familiarity. Horatio Fields was originally committed to Mizzou, and then he switched to Ole Miss when Caden Lee committed to Mizzou, so it's basically a player swap. He was originally at Wake Forest, and then he looked decent there, but he was just kind of a big body chain mover type of receiver. Then he broke his foot while at Auburn. He missed 2/3 of the season. He seems to be healthy now, and despite the whole transfer situation, I do think that he'll have some sort of impact as a depth player on this team. The wide receiver room gets a B overall grade for me, and I think this could very easily become an A, but when you stack it up compared to some other rooms in the SEC, you realize that the talent is very unproven. I mean, we have Darrell Gill Jr., who looked really good when he was healthy at Syracuse, and he was held back by quarterback play, I admit that, but it's gonna be a step up in competition. How is he gonna produce when every single week he's facing NFL DBs? Jonte Cook's another one where it's like all the potential is there for him to be a fantastic player. I mean, we're talking about a day 2 NFL caliber type of player, but we don't know what he's gonna be. I can't grade this room an A knowing that Jonte Cook is still could leave the team at any moment. And then obviously we have the returning player in Deuce Alexander as the starter, but we also don't fully know what he can be either. So this room gets a B. That might be controversial, but I could very easily see this becoming an A by the end of the season. The Ole Miss tight end room is probably the one I know the least about. I remember before the 2025 season, I watched Luke Hodge and thought that he had real star potential. Injuries have plagued him throughout college. He missed time in 2023 and 2025, almost the whole season, and you didn't really notice it though because of how good Daquan Wright ended up being. Hodge is much of a more vertical threat at tight end, so I don't necessarily know if he'll fill that big of a role blocking, but they're gonna continue to use the tight end as more of a gadget H-back type of player, so it's not gonna be his primary responsibility. They also brought in Brady Prieskorn from Michigan, who's another tight end that has problems staying healthy. He's much more of an all-around player than Hodge is. He's 6'5", 250 pounds. He's a willing blocker. You can't really play tight end at Michigan and not be willing to do it, so honestly would not be surprised if he's an unsung hero on this team if he can stay healthy. He only saw limited time at Michigan playing special teams and appearing in a couple other games, but I do think there is potential for this player to be decent. He's still young and has a good size profile. And then finally they got Michael Smith, who had a whole saga. He quit on South Carolina halfway through the year. Then he tried to transfer to Syracuse before he ended up at Ole Miss, and it's just kind of a wild ride, so we'll see what happens with him. I'm giving this room a C, truthfully. I just don't know who's in there that really moves the needle for me. Maybe I could be impressed if Luke Hodge has a breakout, but all of them seem to have issues staying healthy or staying on the field and not quitting on the team, so not sure what we can expect from this Ole Miss tight end room. And then we get to the offensive line, and they return all 3 starters from last season, and honestly, I think this group was a bit overrated. I know PFF says that they're great, but I think a ton of this was masked by scheme and the talent of Lacy and Chambliss. When you really watch them down to down, they struggle. And I talked about this earlier with Lacy, but there are moments where you can tell he's waiting and he wants to see the lane open up, and then it just closes and he gets blown up before he can get there. Granted, the run blocking is good. They are a good unit. I just don't think they're this elite unit that people in PFF make them out to be. When I say that, I mean I don't really see any top 100 or top 150 draft picks. I think that right guard Patrick Kudus is probably the best of the bunch if I had to choose. Here's a perfect example of just this hole is instantly clogged for Lacy. He has to bounce this outside, drawing a holding call. This isn't a one-off though. I mean, this happened quite a bit when you really sit down and watch. Luckily for the passing game, the offense will still prioritize getting the ball out fast, and Chambliss is great enough of an athlete to make up for any pressure. I do think the talents of him and Lacy mask some of the bad play from the offensive line. I think they communicate well. That's one bonus, is that it's really important for these interior guys. All 3 of them are returning. I thought they handled stunts well. They're able to check when they see the blitz. There are lots of positives here. When I watch them, I get even more frustrated with just how horrendous the Texas offensive line was in 2025. Overall, I am giving this unit a B. I do think that because there is that continuity between the 3 starters, there's potential for them to be a solid unit. I don't know what the tackle situation will look like because I wasn't very impressed with Carius Kern. We'll see if he measures up to his potential, but it could be something that holds them back. Like Chambliss might be on the run quite a bit this year. So the offense overall is really good. It's a borderline S tier unit because of those 2 players named Trinidad Chambliss and Kewan Lacy. Overall, though, I am giving it an A. I think it's held back by maybe some inconsistencies in tackle play, the skill position players not being elite. I don't think there's one guy in that room where it's like, that is the alpha, we can turn to him every play and know that he'll be there. And then the tight end room is just too much of a mystery for me to really rank this as an S tier unit. So I'm going with A. I still think they're great. Obviously a top 10 team. We'll see how it all gels. For the defense, I'm gonna do this in 3 layers: defensive line, linebackers, and secondary, starting off with the big fellas up front. Ole Miss has one particular standout on the D-line, and that is defensive tackle Will Eccles. He burst onto the scene out of nowhere as a true sophomore, recording over 6 sacks, 11 TFLs. He is one of the best players at his position in the sport. He is truly a human grizzly bear. He played the most snaps of any defensive tackle in the FBS last year. No exaggeration, he was always on the field. Poor him and Xavier Harris, man. Pete Golding said, "You're gonna be out there and you're gonna play." Kind of shocked he wasn't injured. But yeah, Will Eccles is a very athletic defensive lineman. I really enjoyed watching his tape. I made a video on him that you can watch. I'll link that in the bio to go a little more in detail on how he is as a player. Another interior guy that stood out to me was Jamarius Brown. He was a depth piece last year, but I think we could continue to see him get snaps and really just be a solid, reliable second option at defensive tackle. Then the other guy they have returning is Suntarine Perkins, who is a really good player. He's undersized, built like a dime linebacker, to be honest, just 6'2", around 220 pounds, but he plays the jack role in this defense. He's kind of a hybrid outside linebacker, edge rusher that's gotten really popular in the SEC and college in general. He can get after the quarterback very well with his speed, and he's also really solid in coverage. Golding uses him as like a chess piece type of defender, and he wears a lot of hats for Ole Miss. I think he'll have to step up this year with the departure of Prince William Onmielen, and they didn't really bring in any other speed rusher that makes me that excited, so I think a lot of pressure might be on his shoulders. We talked about the other transfers earlier, and I'm not kidding when I say they make up the whole defense, so let's get into the linebacker room, and we pretty much covered it in the transfer section. They returned 2 guys in Jacoby Hobson and Raymond Collins, but we know who the starters are going to be. I think this is a boomer bust unit, and luckily the scheme should help them out a bit with the movements that Golding gets up front. We'll get to that in just a second because I think this defensive line kind of plays a big role in how successful these linebackers will be. The secondary is probably the most improved area, and it's not exactly hard to do based on how bad they were last year. All of those pieces that they added are more talented than what they had. Jay Crawford is the big standout to me. I expect him to be a true difference maker. Like, I think he'll be off to the NFL after this season. For the defense as a whole, I'm giving this unit a B. I don't think it's a bad unit at all. I just think there are some questions about how is all of this going to come together. And I mentioned that earlier, but you bring in a ton of these transfer guys and how well do they play together? How are they all going to pick up on this system? They all come from different schemes and different organizations and different ways that teams are run. How does that all work? I think we might see some defensive struggles early on in the year, but I think there's enough veterans where they can kind of get them into shape, especially along the defensive line. I like that Will Eccles is still there. I like the replacement they brought in for Xavier Harris, just be a big space eater. And I really think that Suntarine Perkins is a very good college linebacker, edge rusher type of player. Maybe not as much of a future in the NFL, but he definitely will be impactful for this defense. Now that we've gone through the roster, let's talk about the scheme. And I won't spend ages talking about this, but I really do want to break down what you can expect to see from the defense and the offense next year, starting off with the Ole Miss defense. This one is really simple because it stays the exact same. Personnel-wise, they are a 4-2-5 defense, but there are multiple in their fronts and formations. Hopefully the graphics on screen will kind of help explain these things as we go. Golding comes from the Saban coaching tree, which means a lot of the man-match, zone-match principles that Saban implemented will also show up in Ole Miss because Golding had the chance to learn from him and kind of make his own version of that. Throughout the video, I'm going to mention a lot of different terms, and I'm generally going to refer to the Saban terminology just because I don't know exactly what Pete Golding calls everything in his defense, but we know that we can talk about Nick Saban's because it has been so publicly broadcasted now. We know what these things are called, we know what the responsibilities are. It's a little easier to explain than picking up on Pete Golding's nuances when I'm not in that room. The terminology that you need to know starts off with the apex defender, and this is usually a linebacker or a box safety, but it's just the closest defender inside the outside cornerback. Usually he'll be the first one responsible for the flats. And then there's these 2 responsibilities. Meg responsibility is very simple. It's just man everywhere he goes. The defender with Meg responsibility just has to play man-to-man coverage. Typically you'll see this when a team is running trips. The receiver on the opposite side, not the passing strength, the corner on that receiver will be in Meg. And then there's mod responsibility, which stands for man on demand. This tells the corner to stay in man-to-man coverage if the receiver goes vertical. If he doesn't, then he might drop back or pass him off and become a zone player instead. There are times where this defense just plays cover one straight up. I mean, that's not uncommon, but typically it'll be these more complex quarter style coverages with man match responsibilities based on formation, down and distance, route concepts. There's a lot of things that go into this, and I'm not gonna be able to explain all of them in this video, but we'll look at a couple examples to hopefully help you understand it a bit more. The first thing I'll point out is the use of the jack player and some of the fronts that they use. They use this defensive end linebacker hybrid in a variety of ways. Typically you'll see him walked up in a 4-man even front like this, and then he'll back off and they'll rush 3 guys. It's a way to stay in 4-2-5 personnel, but then rush 3 and kind of take advantage of having that extra versatile player in coverage. You can see them line up in the same front here, but you'll see these 2 defensive tackles run a stunt, which is the bread and butter of this defensive line, especially against the run, which we'll get to. Here you'll see them switch into this tight front, which is the nose head up on the center. You've got 2 defensive ends on inside shade on the tackles at the 4-eye position, and then the linebackers are here to scrape. But you'll still have that jack hybrid player as a stand-up rusher, and they end up blitzing out of this, which is a great defensive play call because that offensive line is just overloaded. They don't have enough guys to block it up. Hopefully that gives you some insight into that 4th defensive lineman. He's a really versatile piece. He can rush the passer, he can drop back into coverage, but basically it makes it so you don't have to simulate a pressure. You can just have your standard personnel on the field, have your standard fronts, and he can kind of disguise what you're gonna do. The fronts I just showed are what Pete Golding lined up in primarily against Georgia, but they'll run a lot of different things. Like here we see a more traditional over front. For generating pressure, they're not exactly blitz happy. They don't do these crazy rotations and simulated pressures like in Indiana does. They do twist a lot, but they also just trust their guys to win one-on-one, for better or for worse. Here is that tight front again. They're gonna run this nose under tackle stunt and try to bring Eccles around. I can't say it's always effective, but there are moments where it clears lanes for guys to come through unblocked. Here's a really basic sim pressure look where they're gonna drop this backer and then they try to loop Will Eccles here, but it doesn't work very well. And that's why I say that it's not always effective, because when guys run into their own guy, yeah, that's not a recipe for success. I do want to talk about their stunts against the run. You saw a peek of it earlier. When these stunts work, you get guys unblocked, able to fill gaps. So even if you can't win matchups one-on-one, you can still be effective. The point of this is to just create chaos and hopefully miscommunications between the offensive line where you can get in a position to where, let's say your defensive tackle can't win one-on-one versus that dominant guard. If you can wrap another player behind him, you can kind of get around that and get him off balance and get him at an angle that he isn't able to block you at. Will Eccles accelerates at running these because he's such an athletic defensive tackle. That's one of the reasons he is so good in this defense, is he's fast enough, agile enough, and also has the stamina to keep running these all game long and to kind of be just that annoying defensive tackle that is somehow not able to quit and is always on his feet. Now on the back end, it gets a little more complicated. You're gonna see cover 1, you're gonna see cover 4, cover 6, and cover 7. We'll talk about cover 7 today because that's basically just the man match version of cover 6, which is similar to quarters. It's a really long story to explain all of these. If you want a football 101 video that just goes over the basic defensive coverages, I would love to make that. But for the purpose of time, we'll stick to explaining cover 7 today. I mentioned this earlier. It's basically the man match version of quarter, quarter, half, where the outside corner and the apex defender will trade off responsibilities depending on the actions of the number 1 and number 2 receiver. Important note, none of what I'm talking about right now should be taken as fact because neither you nor me are in those defensive rooms knowing exactly what these guys are being coached to do. This is just an observation from watching a couple of plays. In this play, we can see mod coverage, man on demand here, and you'll see why it looks like cover 4. We've got the apex defender who's going to pass off this receiver to the mod corner, who will then take him deep because his threat did not go past 5 yards. That is usually the cutoff for these defenders. If it goes past 5 yards, you'll take him deep. If it doesn't, you'll pass him off. This corner here probably needs to see this sooner, but nothing bad ends up happening. On the other side, we've got a similar thing happening. This corner takes him deep, and this defender races to the flats. We have a hook linebacker in the middle, and then our 2 deep safeties. You'll see why after this looks like quarters if we just paused it right here. Now you can see it out of a trips formation. On the non-passing strength, this corner is just playing Meg. Then the other side, we can see the responsibility switch happen when he goes deep. Now, these defenses aren't always called this way. Like, this is a typical cover 3. There's nothing special happening other than the corner bailing to maybe try and disguise this. It's not always this complex system, but more often than not, they will be running some form of that, whether it's on one side of the field, dividing it into halves and playing different responsibilities based on what those receivers do. In the red zone, you'll see a lot of man coverage. It burned them against Georgia, which is why they went out and got an entirely new secondary in the portal, and I can't say that I blame them. His coverages have been prone to bust. I mean, we saw one earlier. We'll find out if that's a coaching issue or if it's a personnel issue, because sometimes you can blame the scheme all you want, but if players aren't executing, then there's only so much that the coach can do. Now, knowing the track record of some absolute meltdowns at Alabama with their defense, we probably can place some blame on the scheme, which is why I wasn't ecstatic about the hire of Pete Golding for Ole Miss, because I do think there are some questions to be had about how great of a defensive coordinator is he actually when this repeatedly happens every year. Moving on to the offense, they brought in John David Baker, and he will be more of the same for Ole Miss. We showed some clips earlier in the video, but it's very similar to the Kiffin-style offense since he coached under Lane. This offense is basically a modified veer and shoot, but it doesn't involve these incredibly wide receiver alignments. The offense still heavily utilizes the H-back utility tight end position for mismatches, but Baker's also not afraid to bring in 12 personnel. I would expect to see 2 tight ends on the field quite often, which is interesting given the transfers brought in. I don't think that room is the strongest right now, but that remains to be seen. He's also going to emphasize running the ball, which makes sense given the ground game that Ole Miss is able to have. You'll probably see a lot of inside zone, duo, split zone. This is not a stretch or wide zone type of offense. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of pin and pull. Maybe it's because the athletes that they had at ECU, but the offensive line is not going to be on the move too much. Now, obviously, this could change when he gets into the Ole Miss building, but based on track record from watching the offense at East Carolina, this is what I'm expecting to see if I'm an Ole Miss fan. One of the things that he didn't have that well at ECU was the ability to run the quarterback. That's going to change for sure. I would expect to see Chambliss's legs still play a massive role this season. To start off with the passing game, he is going to create some easy opportunities for his QB. This is nothing new. Be prepared for a whole lot of, okay, Jonte Cook, go show us what you can do after the catch. A lot of one-read throws, just get it out to the receiver, let them do the work. They're also going to spread out the defense and try to run the ball out of trips formations. And then, of course, they're going to hunt their explosives like we see in the very next play in this game against Memphis. They're going to get the ball out fast. I think I watched this exact screen multiple times per game for Ole Miss, unless it's just all blending together at this point. I could be wrong. The one thing that would concern me as an Ole Miss fan, though, is lack of creativity. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but it's hard to recreate the wild stuff that Kiffin and Weiss drew up together, for better or for worse. That offense utilized a lot more motion and movement than what I saw from ECU, and the wild moments of Lane's play calling is something that you can't just go and bring in from a new offensive coordinator, even if it's the same scheme. Kiffin's situational awareness and crazy gutsy calls, that's what you're going to be missing. But I don't think the offense will take a huge step back, and there's a lot of talent here to help mask any changes in coordination, but I think it's going to be comfortable for Chambliss and Lacy to be playing in a very similar system to what they had before. They're not going to have to go and learn entirely new things. It's all going to be very familiar to them. Now, with all of that said, let's finally put it all together and get into our record predictions for this season. Ole Miss opens up in a neutral site game against Louisville, and this could be interesting. I mean, they're not a slouch. I still see Ole Miss winning, though. I just think they're too talented and they'll pull this off. I do like what Louisville did in the portal. I think they had a really strong class, but Game 1, I still think that Ole Miss's talent is enough to end up beating them, but this game could be closer than people expect. Then the next game they play Charlotte. We don't even need to talk about that. And then it's LSU, and I actually think that Ole Miss beats LSU this year. They're at home. It would be very different if this game was in Death Valley, but I just think that they're able to get it done. I think this LSU team is much more built out of the portal than this Ole Miss team is, and we don't know how that team is going to gel. I think it's very fair to say that in the first few weeks of the year, LSU could look a little shaky, which makes me even more upset as a Texas fan that we're playing them late in the year, but that's besides the point. One thing that I think is overstated is the emotional aspect of football. It doesn't matter as much as we, the fans, think it does. If you can't get motivated to play in any game, you're probably not going to be a successful team, and I don't think that the best players at Ole Miss care that much, to be honest. I mean, yeah, they're probably upset that Kiffin left, but at the same time, this is business. They go out there, they play ball. No one on the LSU football team has really wronged them in any way, and I don't know. They probably don't like Lane Kiffin, but I don't think this affects the players as much as the fans really think it will. And then they go on the road to Florida in the Swamp, and for me, this was a sneaky loss. I do think that after the LSU game, it just makes sense to go in there and be a little on your high horse maybe for beating LSU. You overlook Florida a bit, and I think this Florida team is going to pull off some upsets this year. I think they're going to be good. This roster has always had so much talent on it, and I think they got even better. There's a world where Ole Miss goes in and smacks them, of course, like A&M did 2 years ago when I thought Florida was good and Marcel Reed went in there and just tore them to shreds. But I don't know, I just have a weird feeling about this one. I think they pick up a loss. Then they have a bye week, and then they go to play Vanderbilt on the road, and I could see Vandy clicking towards the end of the year, but early on, I think this is a pretty easy win for Ole Miss, not a lot to write home about. And then they go and they get Mizzou at home, and poor Mizzou, man. I think on paper they should be good, but they just got a tough schedule, and I don't think this game is one that they'll be favored in. Austin Simmons returning to Oxford is a fun storyline, but there's a reason Trinidad Chambliss got the job. I think he's the better player, and ultimately I think that they get the win. And then we have at Texas, and there is a world where Texas loses this game in my mind. It would not shock me at all if Ole Miss came in here and kind of smacked Texas around. Not that I think that would happen, but I don't know. The fan superstition in me just is really not wanting to call this game. I do think that Texas does get the win and Ole Miss takes another loss on the road. This game will be very entertaining. I think last year, Pete Kwiatkowski struggled a lot against these high-tempo offenses. If you watch the Mississippi State game, you'll see what I mean. But Will Muschamp has a different mentality instilled in this defense, and rather than just letting them dink and dunk all the way down the field, I think we'll see a little more aggression and trying to force Chambliss off of his spot. This one might end up being on Kewan Lacy's shoulders, to be honest. This is the best pass rush that Ole Miss is going to face at DKR. I think Texas wins a really fun game, and I can't wait to be at this one. And then they play Auburn at home. I don't have a ton to add. Auburn will be a fun to watch 5-7 or 6-6 team with Byron Brown, but I don't think they have what it takes here. And then they get Georgia. I don't care that this is at home. To me, this is another loss. I don't see Georgia losing this game, if I'm being honest with you. Once again, I could be wrong. I think Ole Miss has the talent to beat Georgia. We saw them do it in the Sugar Bowl. But I just feel like Georgia's going to come in and get the win this year. I think they're a better team than they were last year. They have more experience now. I don't see Ole Miss winning this game. And then they go on the road to play Oklahoma, and I actually think they beat Oklahoma. I think it'll be a really fun game to watch, though, especially because these two are such historical, bitter, hated rivals of each other. Thanks, SEC. The Sooners being at home does matter a lot. Like, I think it gives them a significant advantage, but I'm going to trust the Ole Miss offense here to win in a similar style game to last year. And then they go and play Wofford, easy win. Why are we playing Wofford in the second to last game of the year? Thank God that's going away. And then finally, they end their season with Mississippi State. This is probably another easy win. It wouldn't surprise me if Jeff Lebby is gone by the time they're playing this game. They're a train wreck. There's really no way around it. I think they should be a lot better than they are, but I still think Ole Miss wins. So that puts them at 9-3, and I think they have a legitimate argument to make the playoff based on their schedule. They play a lot of tough games. They'd have that win over LSU, and I think that what could favor them is that LSU will probably be clicking at the end of the year and rolling on all cylinders. So when we look back with the recency bias and think, oh, Ole Miss beat this LSU team, I mean, that's a huge achievement. And to be fair, it would be, even if they weren't the same team when they played. You might get into a similar situation with Texas last year where they lost to Florida in the Swamp, and ultimately that kept them out of the playoffs after losing to other two top 5 teams in Georgia and Ohio State. It'd be very similar for Ole Miss. They'd have losses to Georgia and Texas and probably an unranked Florida. So is that win against LSU going to be good enough to, actually that win against Oklahoma, I'll be fair here, are those wins good enough to get them in? Now there's a world in where Ole Miss goes 10-2 or 11-1 with the schedule. That wouldn't shock me at all, but based on this prediction, I think 9-3 is the most realistic scenario for this team. So hopefully for Ole Miss fans and SEC fans, that is a decent picture of what 2026 will look like. I know this was a very long video. Thank you to all of you who stuck around till the end or just skipped throughout and figured out the pieces that you wanted to watch. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy this content. It takes a lot to make, but I really do enjoy doing it, and it's what allows me to keep going and putting out this really detailed, in-depth analysis for you guys. I'll be back with my 9th graded team within the next 2 weeks, most likely, so be sure to subscribe, hit the notification button so you don't miss it when that comes out. Go follow me over on Patreon and on TikTok if you want even more in-depth analysis for college football. This is going to be such a fun series and such a fun season. I can't wait to go through it with all of you watching this video. Thank you so much.